Now, this is the way I see it, Lindsay. Just complete and just total, complete disclosure. Does Tom Izzo did he need these recruits? Like, these are recruits that are right in his backyard. I know that Duke and Coach K typically recruit very well out of the Chicago area, as does Tom Izzo with some of his players. But were these must-get guys? Is this something that will help solidify his legacy? Because just the way that I'm looking at it is that he has to win national championships with these guys, and the window seems to be closing in regards to how much time that he really has before he can cut down a natty.
To answer your question, I can't help but take a quote from Coach Calipari when he tells his top recruits, "I want you, but I don't need you." I'll say the same thing for Tom Izzo, and this is what I would say to him as a friend with the time I spent around him. He wants a national championship, but he doesn't need it because he has one. Now, as we said before, if you can get 2 national championships, that puts you in a different stratosphere. And he's a competitor. He wants that. The window is still open. There's still an opportunity. And with the drive and determination he has, this is the kind of path he wants to be on, where he can recruit these one-and-dones, which makes him feel relevant. That way it can answer the question, hey, do you really have it to be able to go up against a Duke in recruiting, go up against a Kentucky in recruiting, and also to be able to win Chicago. He lost to Barry Parker, Chicago native, to Duke. Now with this new opportunity, he's taking advantage of this. I think there's an opportunity for him to take advantage of his relevance right now. Many could argue that he would have been in the Final Four, if not the championship game, if this season wasn't ended because of COVID-19. And I think in this particular case, he's probably just as surprised as many other people that he was able to recruit these kind of guys. And I say that with all due respect because he's one of the last of Mohicans. Like I said before, he's one of those last guys that can build a program. And what young people need now is mental toughness. And Coach Tom Izzo is the mental toughness coach of this generation right now.
Lindsay Huddleston knowing all about mental toughness, SPS. When I'm looking at this lens, though, I'm seeing it as if, although he really did need these guys, I know everybody everybody seems like they're kind of going the one and done way, where you do have somebody like a Coach Cal who put everything in motion, what it feels like and seems like, so to speak, with the one and done. And then, of course, behind him, you have Coach K, who seems like he took a page out of there as well. But Tom Izzo isn't necessarily known for having some of his best seasons with one and done players, or having some of his best endings with one and done players, even 2 and out. It wasn't too long ago that we did see, and these are things that we can't ignore. Standing in front of the Sparty statue or not, we cannot ignore the fact that there was a team that he had which only lost about 4 or 5 games. Miles Bridges as a sophomore, a lottery pick. Jaren Jackson Jr. as a freshman, a lottery pick, freshman of the year within the conference, and so forth. You lose in your own backyard to Syracuse in Detroit, and you got Jaren Jackson sitting over there on the bench. These are things that people around this area are not forgetting. They're not ignoring it. It's consistently coming up, and I think that it's also in the back of Tom Izzo's mind. And the big question is will we see something like that again? What kind of conversations are the parents having with Tom Izzo in regards to something like that potentially even happening again? So if you are Tom Izzo, what is that mentality? What is that mindset? You work so much within mental. What is that mentality and what he likely was telling some of the parents to confirm that there won't be any of those situations again?
One word: evolution. Tom Izzo's got an opportunity to evolve. He looks back on that, and I'm sure he would wish for any reason to have had Jaren Jackson Jr. on the floor, even if it was still a loss. But that's what you get when you go back in hindsight. He's committed to the tape. He goes back and he watches the tape, and I'm sure he's had discussions with other great basketball minds of what he can do. Now I think there's an opportunity for him to move forward and learn from that, not to be in that situation again. And, coaches play things over and over in their mind all the time, and I'm sure there are many things he would want to go back and do and change because of that matter. So with that being said, I think there's an opportunity for him to evolve. He can learn from that. He has a great coaching staff around him, other great coaching minds that can give him great insight. And coaching, that's a fraternity. Who knows? He may have had a conversation with Coach Boeheim after that. He may have had a conversation with Coach K, Coach Cal, to say, hey, this is how that works. And I will say this. there are certain coaches, and you and I saw that when you came to be here
For the Duke game.
For the Duke game. Certain coaches just really have Coach Izzo's number, and I say that with all due respect. Coach Izzo has his day as well, but a lot of these Hall of Fame coaches that are on par with him, it's really a fight with them a lot of times compared to the other programs. But you have to remember, Michigan State was always known to be an underdog program, and because they played those tough schedules all the time, it put them in a great type of space come March, and I think that's happening again. But Tom Izzo's going to be singing his swan song pretty soon. With probably a few more seasons left, I think he's going to continue to have high recruits because he's going to be the most senior guy around, and he has evolved into a person. The last thing I'll say about that, with the tragedy of Cassius Winston losing his brother Zach, I've had many conversations with Tom Izzo. One about how does he stay relevant, and he said it has a lot to do with the Steve Smiths of the world, the Magic Johnsons of the world, the Draymond Greens, always being around the program, and that's what's helping them bring in these top recruits. So I think you're going to see evolution in Tom Izzo, and I wouldn't be surprised if he goes out completely on top.
You know, one of my biggest issues has always been, whether you're diehard Sparty or not, one of my biggest issues has always been the fact that sometimes you get spoiled by going to the Final Four so often. That's one of the biggest issues that I've had because a lot of times I feel like the fan base tries to treat Final Fours like they're national championships. If you're Michigan State, I mean, Tom Izzo built this thing essentially from the ground up his way with the help, obviously, of Judd Heathcote. God rest his soul. And so from that standpoint, he wanted to put the program in a position where they can contend and be in the same conversations with the UCLAs and the Dukes, the North Carolinas, the Kansas, the Kentuckys. Connecticut is another one that has won, a ton of championships, 4 of them, I think, in the last 25 years. But, with doing all of that, it comes down to winning the national championship. And I think that that's something that's very important. And, when you are Michigan State and you put yourself in that kind of conversation, you don't lose some of these games, regardless of how good they are. Going to national championship, I know that Butler was good, but you can't afford to lose those games to Butler and you go half of a half without scoring from the field. You can't afford to lose to the Texas Techs. We know that they were a defensive program a couple years ago, 2019, going to national championship and losing to Virginia, but that was your national championship to win. If I would have told you that it would have been Michigan State, Virginia, Texas Tech, and Auburn in the Final Four, and looking at the pedigree of those coaches, with all due respect, but what they've accomplished versus what Tom Izzo has accomplished, you would have told me probably more than likely Michigan State, behind Cassius Winston after beating Zion Williamson, a generational player in Duke, that they were going to win the national championship. That didn't happen. I think that still needs to be on the mind of not just Tom Izzo, but the players that may be potentially returning that was on that roster. And the same thing, to have that same kind of hunger and fight within the players that are going to be coming in for the following years. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. Another thing is that, I've heard a lot of rumors and people saying that, it's out to seem as if Tom Izzo's not recruiting those elite players anymore, those one-and-done players. That, to me, couldn't seem any more false than it is right now, looking at the fact that he just grabbed the number 1 player overall in the country of all high school students, but even the number 1 shooting guard in the country for the class of 2021. Does this add a little extra pressure to Tom Izzo in the event that he doesn't win these national championships now that he has those players? Because if we can't, and I hate to get a little long-winded with you, Linz, but if we're in a position where we're criticizing Coach Cal in 2015 for having the recruits and having the players and having the talent, they go 38-0, but nobody's going to remember that. They're going to remember the fact that they, lost in the semifinal. Right. And it's the same thing with Duke. When they get number 1, number 2, number 3 between Barrett, Williamson, and Reddish, but they don't win a national championship. Right. Tom Izzo has to be held at that exact same he has to be held to the same standard. What are your thoughts on that overall?
No, it's a good thing. I think when you talk about pressure, I see Tom Izzo putting more pressure on himself than he'll receive from Michigan State. He set a standard by being Mr. March, Mr. Final Four, which is a standard that Michigan State University is happy and accepts, but just him personally, individually, I think he wants to be able to move into that other stratosphere, having a second championship, if not a third. I understand the criticism that comes, but I also have to look at it from a standpoint of what was the expectation of the Michigan State program years ago, even after that national championship win. No one was expecting that to happen again, but you saw him still steady work and work his way. And I think what continues to make Michigan State relevant is that these guys want a chance to play in the NBA. And one thing they're finding from the Duke players and whatnot, Michigan State players, no matter how they go, what time they go to the draft, they are always held in a more higher regard than others. I've even known about GMs calling Michigan State coaches regarding players that got drafted to other teams just because they knew that player was getting recruited by Michigan State. So Tom Izzo and his staff has established a reputation behind throughout the NBA as being a team that prepares guys for the next level. And at the end of the day, when these young people are looking around doing things, deciding to school, yeah, they love to be able to say, I went to Duke, I went to Kentucky. But if I go to a Michigan State Tom Izzo coach team, there's a chance I'm going to have some longevity in the NBA. And I think that's what continues to win out. And, again, that pressure, I think that pressure is being more what Tom Izzo puts on himself as opposed to what the rest of the basketball community is stating.
Makes more than a little bit of sense to me, as it appears that Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Terry seem to kind of be like an afterthought a little bit at this point, seeing as two highly regarded players that Michigan State have landed in just within about a week or so. Imani Bates out of Ypsilanti and Max Christie out of Chicago. Let the people know where they can find some of your work. You do a lot of great work. I just came on with you. We did some stuff put on YouTube. Let the people know where they can find it, all the good stuff that you're doing with SPS.
I appreciate it. Sports Psychology Solutions. You can find me at www.thespsedge.org, www.thespsedge.org. Sports Psychology Solutions is a nonprofit organization. I've just released my second book, The SPS Edge, A Guide to Mental Toughness in Sports and Life Post-COVID-19. I have great interviews, including Coach Tom Izzo, talk about my experience with Coach Calipari and other great coaches, but also just preparing ourselves to be mentally tough in sports and life in this new normal that we'll be living in COVID-19. I appreciate you coming on the SPS Mental Health Moment podcast just recently. You can find out on YouTube at the SPS Edge, but it's all about really helping these young people prepare themselves to go forward, and I appreciate you for having me on Tate's Take.
No doubt, man, and I appreciate you. SPS Edge, the first book, the second book, when the third one come out, go and get those too. I can vouch for that. I could definitely do that. And let me tell you something, if you have no earthly idea and you have possibly not been able to subscribe to Tate's Take the podcast, make sure that you go and do that. Follow along on social media as well at Tate's Take Hoops, TATESTAKEHOOPS, where basketball lives. So if you're having a hard time, and I know that y'all really good with those phones and y'all type real fast, so I know that y'all not going to pull a fast one on me. I'm telling you right now, I know how this stuff works. Make sure that you go to your search box, that little magnifying glass, you hover right over that, you put in Tate's Take, make sure that you subscribe. I can't say it enough times. Tell your mama, tell your grandmama, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell everybody, and I appreciate you for doing so as well. Remember to follow along on social media at Tate's Take Hoops, the podcast.